The question Marith had asked stayed with Dayan long after the family had returned to their own quarters. Why? Did you help her? It seemed like such a strange thing to ask because the answer felt so obvious to Dayan that he could not understand why it needed explanation. But as he thought about it more, he realized that the question revealed something important about how the galaxy viewed humans and how the galaxy viewed kindness itself. In the days that followed the incident, word spread throughout Vareth 7 about what had happened. The story traveled from one species to another and grew with each telling. A human Deathworlder had taken in an abandoned alien child and cared for her as if she were his own. He had sung to her and held her and kept her from fading away into loneliness, and when authorities tried to take her from him, the child herself had refused to go different. Species reacted to the story in different ways. The Mirathans found it puzzling because their young were independent from birth and needed no such care. Corvins found it suspicious because they could not imagine helping someone without expecting something in return. Sendari found it moving because they too were a social species who valued community bonds, but almost everyone found it surprising because it did not match what they thought they knew about humans. Dayan became something of a curiosity on the station, and strangers would stop him in corridors to ask about that night. He always gave the same simple answer: she was scared and alone, and she asked for help, so I helped her. This response confused many who heard it because in galactic society, help usually came with conditions. Treaties governed interspecies aid, and agreements determined who would help whom and under what circumstances. The idea of helping simply because someone asked was not common at all. About a week after the incident, Daehyun was eating lunch in the station cantina when an elderly Gorshan approached his table. The Gorshan were among the oldest spacefaring species in this region of the galaxy, and they were respected as scholars and observers of other cultures. "May I sit with you, human?" the Gorshan asked politely. "Of course," Daehyun said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. The Gorshan settled into the chair with the slow movements of advanced age. "I have been studying your species since you first made contact with galactic civilization," the Gorshan said, "and I confess that I have never understood humans until now." "What do you mean?" Daehyun asked. "We called you Deathworlders because your planet seemed designed to kill everything on it," the Gorshan explained, "and we assumed that creatures who survive such a world must be violent and selfish. Above all else, because how else could they endure?" The elderly scholar leaned forward with intense curiosity in her eyes. "But I think we had it backwards," she said. "Your world did not make you cruel because it was harsh, and your world made you kind because it was harsh." The young thought about this for a moment. "I am not sure I understand," he admitted. "On a peaceful world like the Valeth homeworld, there is no need for cooperation beyond basic family units," the Gorshan said. "But on a world like Earth, where danger lurks everywhere and survival is never guaranteed, your species learned that helping each other was not optional but essential." She pointed one gnarled finger at him. "You protect strangers because your ancestors who did not protect strangers died alone in the wilderness," she said. "You care for children who are not your own because your ancestors who did not do this watched their communities collapse, and it is not that you choose to be kind, but rather that kindness is built into the very core of who you are." Daehyun had never thought about it in those terms before, but the Gorshan's words rang true. Humans had always taken in orphans and refugees and strangers in need throughout their history. It was such a basic part of human culture that most humans never questioned it. "The galaxy feared the wrong thing about your species," the Gorshan concluded. "We feared your strength and your endurance and your predator instincts, but those things are merely tools, and the truly significant thing about humans is how you choose to use those tools." She stood slowly and bowed her head in a gesture of respect. "I believe your species will change the galaxy, human," she said, "not through conquest or dominance, but through the simple radical act of caring for those who need care. and I look forward to witnessing what comes next." She walked away, leaving Daehyun alone with his thoughts. That evening, Kiris came to visit with her parents' blessing. She had been coming every few days since the incident, and each time her glow seemed brighter than before. "What are we doing today?" she asked excitedly as she bounced into his apartment. "Today I am going to teach you how to fold paper cranes," Daehyun said with a smile. "Just like the one hanging outside my door." They sat together at his small table, and Daehyun patiently showed her how to fold the paper, step by step. Kiris struggled with her forearms at first, because the technique was designed for beings with only two hands, but she adapted and improvised, and eventually produced a slightly lopsided crane that she held up with pride. "I made it," she announced happily. "Can I hang it next to yours?" "I would be honored," Daehyun said, as he helped her attach the crane to the spot beside his door. Marith arrived to collect his daughter. He stood in the doorway watching them work, and his expression was thoughtful. "The other Velith parents have been asking me about you," Marith said. "They want to know if you would be willing to speak at our community center about human child rearing practices." Daehyun blinked in surprise. "I am not an expert on children," he said. "I just did what felt right." "That is exactly why they want to hear from you," Marith said. "Because what feels right to you seems to be exactly what our children need, and we want to understand why." Daehyun considered the request and nodded slowly. "I would be happy to share whatever I can," he agreed. Marith smiled and placed a hand on Daehyun's shoulder. "I once believed humans were dangerous creatures to be avoided," he admitted. "But now I understand something different, and humans are dangerous, but only to those who threaten what you love and to everyone else. You are perhaps the best friends anyone could ask for." He gathered Kiris into his arms and turned to leave. "Thank you again, human," he said, "for everything." After they left, Daehyun stood in his doorway, looking at the two paper cranes hanging side by side. One was perfectly folded with crisp lines and precise angles. Other was lumpy and uneven and clearly made by small, inexperienced hands. But together, they looked right somehow, like they belonged next to each other. In the weeks and months that followed, Daehyun spoke at the Velith Community Center, and then at gatherings of other species who wanted to understand humans better. He told them all the same thing: humans do not protect because they are strong. Humans became strong because they protect. It is not strategy, and it is not dominance. It is simply what they are, and slowly, one conversation at a time, the galaxy began to see humanity in a new light, not as monsters to be feared, but as guardians waiting to be welcomed all, because one small girl knocked on a stranger's door and asked for help, and the stranger said yes. Marith and Soyen had spent the longest hours of their lives shuttling survivors from the cargo vessel collision to safety stations throughout the sector. They had worked without rest alongside hundreds of other transport pilots answering the emergency call that came in the middle of the night, but their minds were never fully on their work because every spare thought went to their daughter. Kiris alone somewhere on Varus 7. The message they received said only that Kiris was in the care of a human, and that authorities had been notified a human. The word echoed in their minds like a warning siren. Every Velith knew the stories about humans and their capacity for violence. Every Velith parent taught their children to be cautious around the Deathworlders, who had recently joined Galactic Society, and now their precious daughter was alone with one of these dangerous creatures. When the emergency was finally declared under control, Marith and Soyen flew back to Varith 7 faster than regulations allowed. They docked their transport and ran through the corridors toward the human residential block. "What if she is hurt?" Soyen gasped as they ran. "What if the human harmed her?" "We do not know anything yet," Marith said, but his voice shook with the same fear. They reached the human section and found the door they were looking for by the small paper bird hanging outside. Marith pressed the entry chime with trembling hands and waited. Door slid open to reveal a human male with tired eyes and rumpled clothes behind him on a small couch. Their daughter Kiris was sleeping peacefully. Her bioluminescence glowed with the healthiest pink-gold color they had seen in months. For a moment, neither parent could speak because the sight before them was so different from what they had expected. "You must be Kiris's parents," the human said in a gentle voice. "Please come in and try not to wake her because she just fell asleep again." Marath and Soyen entered the small apartment slowly, as if walking into a dream. They approached the couch where their daughter rested, and Soyen let out a soft cry of relief. "She looks so healthy," Soyen whispered. "Her light has not been this strong in so long." Marath turned to the human with confusion and suspicion still warring in his mind. "What did you do to her?" he demanded. The human looked puzzled by the question. "I did not do anything harmful, if that is what you mean," he said. "She came to my door last night alone and frightened because her caretaker never arrived, and I could not reach anyone for help, so I took care of her myself." "Took care of her how?" Marath pressed. The human ran a hand through his messy hair and thought for a moment. "I let her talk when she needed to talk," he said. "I held her when she asked to be held, and I hummed songs when she could not sleep, and I fed her when she was hungry, and I stayed with her so she would not be alone." He said these things simply as if they were the most obvious actions in the universe. "That is all?" Soyen asked. "With this belief, what else would I do?" the human responded. "She was a scared child who needed help." Soyen felt tears begin to stream down her face as the weight of her fear transformed into overwhelming gratitude. What this human described was not just basic care. Among the Velith, it was considered sacred bonding, which was the deepest form of emotional nurturing that could be given to a child. Even many Velith adults struggled to provide such complete and consistent attention to their young, and this human had done it instinctively, without any training, and without any obligation to do so. "You do not understand," Soyen said through her tears. "What you did for her was everything, and our children need constant emotional connection or they fade away, and you saved her life by simply being present and kind." The human looked uncomfortable with this praise. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. "No," Marath said firmly. "That is not true, because most species would not have done what you did, and they would have contacted authorities and waited, or they would have sent her away, or they would have ignored her entirely, but you opened your door and took her in without hesitation." Marath looked at the human with new eyes. The forward-facing gaze that once seemed predatory now appeared watchful and protective. The strong hands that could crush bone seemed instead to be the hands that had held his daughter gently through a long, frightening night. "Why?" Marath asked, and his voice cracked with emotion. "Why did you help her when she is not your species, and not your responsibility, and not your child?" The human considered the question carefully before answering. "On my world, we have a saying that it takes a village to raise a child," he said. "It means that caring for young ones is everyone's job, and not just the parents. And when I saw Kiri's alone and scared at my door, she became my responsibility in that moment." "But you did not know her," Marath said. "I knew she was afraid." The human replied, "I knew she was alone, and I knew she needed help, and that was enough." Kira stirred on the couch and opened her eyes. When she saw her parents, she let out a cry of joy and reached for them with all four arms. Soyen gathered her daughter into her embrace and held her tight while Marath wrapped his arms around them both. "Mama, Papa," Kiri said happily, "you came back. We will always come back to you, little one." Soyen promised always. Kiris pulled back slightly and looked at her parents with serious eyes. "Dayan took care of me," she said. "He was kind and he sang to me and he did not leave me alone, and I was not scared anymore because he was there." "We know, sweetheart," Marath said softly, "and we are very grateful to him." He turned to face the human called Dayan and extended his hand in the gesture he had learned was customary among Human's Dan clasped his hand, and Marith was surprised by the gentleness of his grip. "Thank you," Marith said with all the sincerity in his heart. "Thank you for saving our daughter." "She saved herself," Dahan said. "She was brave enough to ask for help, and all I did was answer." "You did far more than that," Soyen said, "and we will never forget it." Kiris squirmed in her mother's arms and reached out toward Dayan. "Can we visit him again?" she asked her parents. "He is my friend now." Marith and Soyen exchanged a look of surprise there. Daughter had never befriended anyone outside the Velith community before, but then again, she had never met anyone quite like this human before either. "If he agrees to it, then yes, we can visit." Marith Sedahyun smiled warmly at Kiris. "My door is always open for you, little one," he said. "Anytime you want to visit." Kiris's glow brightened with pure happiness. Soyen watched this interaction and felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. She had been taught her whole life that humans were dangerous and unpredictable, but this human had shown her daughter more kindness in one night than some Velith showed in a lifetime. Perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about these Deathworlders all along, or perhaps being from a dangerous world had taught humans something valuable, something about protecting those who could not protect themselves, something about the true meaning of strength. The station morning cycle began with a gradual brightening of the corridor lights and a shift in the air recycling patterns. Dayan had not slept at all, but he did not feel tired because something more important than rest kept him alert. Kiris had managed to sleep for several hours, curled up against his side like a small glowing ember. Her bioluminescence had improved significantly during the night and now pulsed with a healthy pink gold color, but Dayan knew she needed proper nutrition soon because he had heard her stomach making strange sounds. The problem was that human food could be dangerous for Velith digestive systems. Needed to find nutrition packs specifically designed for her species, and the closest supply would be at the commerce level. "Kiris," he said softly, "I need to go get you some food, but that means we have to leave my apartment for a little while." The child stirred and looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "You are not leaving me?" she asked with fear creeping into her voice. "No, never," Dayan assured her quickly. "You are coming with me, and I will carry you if you want." Kiris considered this offer and then nodded. "Yes, please, because my legs feel weak." Dayan carefully wrapped her in the thermal blanket again and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing compared to a human child of similar size, and he held her securely against his chest. Her forearms wrapped around his neck, and she rested her head against his shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." She Sedahyun stepped out into the corridor and immediately noticed several of his neighbors watching from their doorways. The base day human residential block was small but close-knit, and everyone knew everyone else. A marathon couple across the hall stared with wide eyes at the sight of a human carrying a Velith child. A Corvan trader down the corridor stopped mid-step and tilted his head in confusion and ignored them all and walked toward the lift that would take him to the commerce level. As he moved through the station, he attracted more and more attention. Species from a dozen different worlds stopped their conversations to watch the human and his small glowing passengers. Some looked curious, while others looked concerned, and a few looked openly hostile. Dayan understood why this scene might seem strange or even threatening to outside observers. Humans were known as predators, and here was one carrying a child of a prey species. It probably looked like a wolf carrying a lamb to anyone who did not know the context, but Dayan did not care what they thought because his only focus was getting Kiris the food she needed. He reached the commerce level and found the supply shop that sold nutrition packs for various species. The shopkeeper was a tall Sendari with silver scales and suspicious eyes. "Human," the shopkeeper said flatly. "What do you want?" "I need Velith nutrition packs suitable for a child," Dayan said calmly. "3 packs if you have them." The shopkeeper looked at Kiris wrapped in the blanket, and his suspicious eyes narrowed further. "Why does a human need Velith child nutrition?" he demanded. "Because I'm taking care of her until her parents return from emergency duty." Daehan explained patiently. "She has not eaten in many hours." Before the shopkeeper could respond, a loud voice interrupted them. "Stop right there, human." Daehan turned to see a Terethian official approaching with heavy steps. The Terethians were a species known throughout the galaxy for their strict adherence to rules and protocols. They served as administrators and enforcers on many mixed species stations, including Vereth 7. This one wore the uniform of a child welfare monitor, and his expression was stern. "I am Officer Vekloth, the Terethian," announced, "and I must question your possession of that Velith minor." "I am not possessing her," Daehan said with careful patience. "I am caring for her because she came to my door alone and scared last night." "That is precisely the problem, officer," Vekloth said. "You are not an authorized caregiver for this child, and you are not of her species and station. Protocol requires that unaccompanied minors be placed in emergency services custody. Emergency services are overwhelmed with the cargo vessel situation," Daehan pointed out. "I tried to contact them last night and could not get through." "That does not change the protocol," the officer insisted. "You must hand the child over to me immediately." Daehan felt Kiris tighten her grip around his neck, and he could see her glow beginning to flicker with fear. "With respect, officer, I do not think that is what is best for her right now," Daehan said. "Your opinion on what is best is irrelevant, human," the Terethian said coldly. "You are unqualified to make such judgments, and frankly, your species' reputation makes this situation highly concerning." A crowd had gathered around them now, and Daehan could hear whispers in multiple languages. Some agreed with the officer, while others seemed uncertain. Then Kiri spoke in a small but clear voice. "No." Everyone went quiet and looked at the glowing child in the human's arms. "I want to stay with him," Kiri said more firmly. "He stayed with me all night, and he did not leave me alone in the dark, and he hummed songs to make me feel better, and he is kind." "Child, you do not understand," the officer began. "I understand that I was alone and scared, and nobody came to help me." "Except him," Kiris interrupted. "I understand that my light was going out and he made it come back, and I understand that I feel safe with him." She looked at the Terethian with those large, dark eyes full of surprising strength. "My parents told me to trust my feelings, and my feelings tell me this human is good," the crowd murmured with surprise at the child's words. Yuan felt a surge of warmth in his chest at her defense of him. "The child is clearly confused," Officer Vekloth said, but he sounded less certain now. "She does not know the dangers." "What danger?" Kiris demanded. "He fed me and kept me warm and sang to me, and that is what my own parents do. And are you saying my parents are dangerous too?" The Terethian had no response to this. An older Velith woman in the crowd stepped forward with tears forming in her large eyes. "I know this child," she said. "Her family lives near mine, and her parents are indeed transport pilots who were called away last night. And I also know that the designated caretaker was hospitalized yesterday, which is why she never came." She looked at Daehan with an expression of profound gratitude. This human saved her life, because a Velith child alone for so many hours could have faded completely, and he had no obligation to help her, but he did anyway. Officer Vekloth looked uncomfortable. As the mood of the crowd shifted in Daehan's favor, "Protocol still states," he started to say. "Protocol can be flexible when the situation demands it," the older Velith woman interrupted firmly. And this situation clearly demanded exactly what this human provided, which was compassion and care. The officer stood in silence for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back with a stiff nod. "I will make a note that the child is in voluntary temporary care, pending her parents' return," he said formally, "but I will also be contacting her parents to confirm this arrangement." Thank you, Daeun said sincerely. He turned back to the shopkeeper, who now looked at him with very different eyes. The nutrition packs are free of charge, the Sundari said quietly, for what you have done. Daeun accepted the packs with gratitude and headed back toward his apartment. Kiris had buried her face against his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling slightly from the confrontation. You were very brave, he told her softly, standing up for me like that. I only told the truth, she said. You are good, and I do not care what anyone else thinks. As they walked through the corridors, Daeun noticed that the looks from other species had changed. There was still curiosity, but the suspicion and hostility had faded in its place. He saw something that looked almost like respect. Somewhere on the emergency communication channels, a message was being relayed to two very worried Velith parents. Their daughter was with a human, and they needed to return as quickly as possible. But the message contained no details, and their fears began to grow with every passing hour. The station hummed with the quiet sounds of the night cycle as Yoon Dae-hyun sat alone in his small apartment on Orbital Station, Vera 7. He was tired from a long day of fixing broken systems and checking maintenance reports, but sleep would not come to him tonight. The human engineer had lived on this mixed species commerce hub for almost 2 years now, and he had grown used to the strange rhythms of life among aliens. Humans were still relatively new to this part of the galaxy, and many species looked at them with fear or suspicion. Daeun did not mind the looks anymore, because he understood that humans had a reputation as dangerous predators from a deadly world. He was reviewing the day's repair logs on his tablet when he heard something strange at his door. It was not the normal chime that visitors used, but instead a soft scratching sound like something small was trying to get his attention. Daeun stood up slowly and walked to the door with curiosity filling his mind. When the door slid open, he looked straight ahead and saw nothing but empty corridor. Then he heard a tiny voice speak from below him. Please, human. Daeun looked down and his eyes went wide with surprise. Standing at his doorway was a small alien child. No higher than his waist, she belonged to the Velith species, and her 4 thin arms were wrapped around herself as she trembled in the cold corridor air. The Velith were known throughout the galaxy for their luminescent skin that glowed with soft colors based on their emotions, but this child's glow was dangerously dim and flickered like a candle about to go out. Her large dark eyes looked up at Daeun with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Please, human, she said, again in a voice that shook with every word. My parents are gone today, and I do not know what to do. Daeun immediately knelt down to bring himself closer to her level. Hey there, little one, he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. What is your name, and where do you live? I am Kiris, the child whispered. I live in the Velith section on level 14, but my parents had to leave for emergency work, and the neighbor who was supposed to watch me never came. Daeun felt his heart tighten in his chest as he looked at this frightened child. How long have you been alone, Kiris? I do not know, she admitted. Many hours, I think, because the lights changed twice and nobody came, and I was so scared in the dark. The thought of this small child wandering the massive station corridors alone for hours made something protective wake up inside. Daeun, but why did you come to me? He asked gently. Do you know me? Kiris nodded slowly, and her dim glow flickered just a little brighter. You fixed our heating unit last month, she said. You smiled at me, and you did not look at me like I was strange. And I remembered your door because you have that paper bird hanging outside. Daeun glanced back at the small origami crane he had hung by his entrance. As a reminder of home, he never imagined it would serve as a beacon for a lost child. Can I stay with you? Kiris asked, and her voice cracked with emotion. Just until my parents come back, because I do not want to be alone anymore. Daeun did not hesitate for even a second. Of course you can, he said warmly. Come inside where it is warm. He stepped aside, and Carice moved into his apartment with slow, careful steps. Her forearms stayed wrapped tightly around her small body, and Daeyeon noticed that she was shivering badly. Quickly grabbed a thermal blanket from his couch and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Is that better?" he asked. Carice nodded, but her glow remained dim, and that worried Daeyeon greatly. He knew very little about Velith biology, but he had heard that their bioluminescence was connected to their emotional and physical health. A Velith whose light was fading was a Velith in serious trouble. "Carice, I need to contact your parents and let them know you are safe," Daeyeon said as he reached for his communication device. "Do you know their contact codes?" "Yes," she said, and recited the numbers from memory. Daeyeon tried to connect, but the system gave him an error message about overloaded channels. He tried station security next, but received the same result. Then he tried the Velith Community Center and again found no response. "What is happening?" he muttered to himself. Accessed the station newsfeed and quickly found his answer. A massive cargo vessel collision had occurred in the nearby shipping lanes, and Vareth 7 was coordinating emergency evacuation support. Every available transport pilot had been called to duty, which explained why Carice's parents had left so suddenly. All emergency communication channels were overwhelmed with coordination efforts. Daeyeon looked at the small child sitting on his couch and realized he was on his own with no help coming anytime soon. "Carice," he said carefully, "it looks like there was a big accident and your parents are probably helping with the rescue work, and that is very important work." "I know," Carice said quietly. "They are transport pilots and they help people." "That is right," Daeyeon said with an encouraging smile. "And while they are helping others, I am going to take care of you until they come back. But you are human," Kira said with confusion in her voice. "My friends say humans are dangerous." Daeyeon sat down on the floor in front of her, so he would not seem so tall and frightening. "Some humans can be dangerous," he admitted honestly. "Just like some members of any species can be dangerous. But I promise you, Carice, that I will not hurt you, and I will not leave you alone." Carice studied his face with those large dark eyes for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised Daeyeon completely. She reached out with one of her small hands and touched his cheek. "Your skin is warm," she said with wonder. "My mother told me humans come from a hot world." "We do," Daeyeon said with a soft laugh. "Earth has places that are very hot and places that are cold, but my body likes to stay warm all the time." "That is nice," Kira said, and her glow flickered slightly brighter. "The station always feels cold to me." Daeyeon noticed a small change in her luminescence and felt hope rise in his chest. "Are you hungry, Carice?" he asked. "I am not sure I have food that is safe for you to eat, but I can try to find something." "I am not hungry," she said. "I just do not want to be alone." Those simple words hit Daeyeon harder than any punch ever could. He understood loneliness very well because he had felt it many times since leaving Earth and coming to live among alien species. "Then I will stay right here with you," he promised. "I will not go anywhere." Carice pulled the blanket tighter around herself, and her glow stabilized. Just a little more outside the apartment, the station continued its emergency operations, and Daeyeon knew it might be many more hours before help arrived, but that did not matter to him, because right now his only job was to make sure this frightened child felt safe. He had no training for this situation and no manual to follow, but he had something that felt more important. He had the simple human instinct to protect someone small and scared who had asked for his help, and for Daeyeon, that was enough. Carice had always been taught to fear humans. Her teachers at the Learning Center spoke of them in hushed voices and called them Deathworlders from a planet so violent that everything there evolved to kill her classmates shared stories about human strength and human endurance and human appetites that seemed impossible to believe. They said humans could run for hours without stopping and could survive injuries that would kill any Velith instantly. They said humans had forward-facing eyes like predators because they were designed to hunt, but the human called Daehyun did not seem like a monster to Kiris. He had kind eyes even, if they did face forward, and his voice was deep but gentle, like the sound of water flowing over smooth stones when he wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. His movements were careful and slow, as if he was afraid of breaking her. Kiris knew she was fragile compared to him because all Velith were fragile compared to most species in the galaxy. Her people had evolved on a calm world with no predators and no violent weather and no disasters. They had never needed to be strong, so they became sensitive instead. Velith could feel emotions in the air around them and could sense the intentions of others through tiny changes in body language and chemical signals. That is why Kiris knew with complete certainty that Daehyun meant her no harm. His body radiated warmth and concern and protective energy that reminded her of her own parents. "Kiris, can you tell me what you need?" Daehyun asked as he sat on the floor across from her. "I want to help, but I do not know much about taking care of Velith children." Kiris appreciated his honesty because it showed he was not pretending to know things he did not. "No, my mother usually hums to me when I am scared," she said softly. "The vibrations help calm my nervous system." "I can try that," Daehyun said, "but I do not know any Velith songs." "That is okay," Kiris said. "Any humming will work, I think." Daehyun nodded and closed his eyes for a moment. Then he began to hum a melody that Kiris had never heard before. It was strange and beautiful, with rising and falling notes that seemed to tell a story without words. The sound waves moved through the air and touched her skin, and Kiris felt something inside her begin to relax. "What is that song?" she asked when he paused. "It is a very old song from my grandmother's home in Korea," Daehyun explained. "She used to sing it to me when I was small and could not sleep." "Korea," Kiris repeated the unfamiliar word. "Is that a place on your planet?" "Yes, it is a place called a country where my family comes from," Daehyun said. "Earth has many different countries with different languages and different songs." "That sounds complicated." Kiris Daehyun laughed softly, and the sound of his laughter made Kiris's glow brighten just a little more. "It is very complicated," he agreed. "Humans are not very good at agreeing with each other, so we have many different ways of doing things." Kiris found this fascinating because Velith society was very unified, and everyone followed the same customs and traditions. The idea of a species that could not agree with itself seemed strange, but also somehow wonderful. "Will you hum more?" she asked. "Please." "Of course," Daehyun said, and he continued the melody from where he had stopped. Kiris pulled her legs up onto the couch and wrapped all four arms around her knees as she listened. The human's voice was not perfect, but there was something genuine in it that Kiris could feel deep in her core. He was not just making sounds to fulfill her request. He was trying to comfort her with something meaningful from his own memory and his own heart. This was what the Velith called true resonance, when two beings connected through shared emotional intent. Kiris had been told that other species could not achieve true resonance because they lacked the sensitivity of the Velith, but here was a human creating that exact feeling through nothing more than an old song and honest kindness. "My light is getting brighter," Kiris said with surprise as she looked at her own arm. Daehyun opened his eyes and smiled when he saw the soft pink glow returning to her skin. "That is good, right?" he asked. "Yes, that means I'm feeling better," Kiris confirmed. "When Velith children are very scared or very sad, our light fades, and if it fades too much, we can become very sick." Daehyun's expression changed to one of serious concern. "How sick?" he asked. "Sometimes Velith children do not recover," Kiris admitted quietly. "That is why we are never supposed to be left alone, because loneliness can hurt us as much as any disease." Daehyun was silent for a long moment, and Kiris could feel the wave of protective anger that rolled off him. He was not angry at her, but at the situation that had put her in danger. That will not happen to you, he said firmly. I will not let it. A station announcement suddenly filled the apartment with a calm automated voice. Attention all residents of Vara 7. The emergency response operation is expected to continue for approximately 12 more hours and all non-essential. Personnel are asked to remain in their quarters until further notice. 12 more hours. Kiris felt fear start to creep back into her heart, and her glow flickered. Dahan noticed immediately, and he moved closer to her. Hey, look at me, Kiris, he said gently. 12 hours is nothing, and I'm not going anywhere. Okay. But your work, Kiris started to say. My work can wait. Dahyun interrupted. Right now, you are the most important thing. No one outside her family had ever said something like that to Kiris before. She was a small child of a minor species on a station full of important people doing important things. Why would a human engineer care about her more than his duties? But she could feel the truth in his words, and she knew he meant every one of them. Can I ask you something? Kiris said. You can ask me anything. Dahan replied. Why are you being so nice to me? She asked. You do not know me, and I'm not a human, so why do you care what happens to me? Dahan seemed confused by the question, as if the answer was so obvious. He did not understand why she needed to ask, because you were scared and alone. He said simply, and you asked for help, and helping you was the right thing to do. Kiris thought about this answer for a long time. On the Velith homeworld, children were cared for by their extended families and their communities because everyone understood the danger of leaving young ones alone. But that care was given out of duty and tradition and biological necessity. This human had no duty to her and no tradition that required him to help. He helped simply because he thought it was right. Kiris moved closer to Dahyun and leaned against his arm. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through his sleeve, and the warmth of his body chased away the cold that had settled in her bones. Thank you, she whispered. Dahyun put his arm around her small shoulders, very carefully and very gently. You do not need to thank me, he said. Now try to rest, and I will keep humming. Okay. Kiris closed her eyes and let the strange, beautiful melody carry her towards sleep. For the first time in many hours, she did not feel alone. She felt safe in the care of a creature her people called a monster, and she wondered if maybe her people had been wrong about humans all along.